India should use its diplomatic influence in Tel Aviv to ensure that Netanyahu now basks in the victories that he has already had, but does not launch a major assault upon Iran. There would need to be, on the contrary, certain initiatives taken by countries, and I would put India as a role player in that. Countries like India and possibly other countries which are influential in the region, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, should be able to now become diplomatic players in the region.
Hello and welcome to ABP Live. I have with me today veteran diplomat and Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. He was India's ambassador to Saudi Arabia twice and also India's envoy to UAE and Oman. He also has a book called The West Asia at War, and we are going to understand from him what really happened in Syria in the past couple of weeks, the fall of the Assad regime, and the fact that the role the countries are playing, like the United States, Israel, and also Turkey, Iran, and what is really happening between Syria and the rest of the world, and what the impact it will have on the Indian subcontinent as well. Welcome to ABP Live, sir, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, sir. So if I can understand from you and also for our viewers what really happened in Syria, if you can give us a little synopsis of the history, and of course we'll come to the future as to what's next. So if you can tell us, how has the Assad regime been? India has done several dealings with the Assad regime, but going forward, what really we can expect. So if you can take us a little back, from when the crisis really unfolded.
The roots of the present crisis go back to 2011. Syria at that time experienced uprisings, very small in terms of their impact. Very often in the initial stages, actually children were involved. But the regime reacted very harshly. And as a result, the regime alienated large sections of people because of their harshness. And as a result, you find that various countries in the neighborhood started engaging with matters relating to Syria. Initially, you found a lead role played by Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. In the case of Saudi Arabia, they were concerned that as a result of the fall of Hosni Mubarak, they had lost a strategic partner. And they thought that that they would gain strategic credibility in the region if they could have regime change in Syria and bring Syria into the mainstream Sunni fold. And as a result of this initiative, they thought that they would be able to block the rising influence of Iran. So at that time, Saudi Arabia became the principal role player in trying to obtain regime change in Syria. They expected the Americans to bomb Damascus and destroy the regime exactly as they had done in Iraq. But the Americans backed off. At that time, Obama pointed out to the Saudi side that wherever Americans have effected regime change, the jihadis have won. And this has been the case both in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq. And he asked the Saudis to explain to him what was their plan for the day after. And as a result, the Saudis found that they were not getting American support. They started to go forward with regard to their regime change project on their own. And they facilitated the emergence of a large number of armed militants who would bring down the regime. The plan worked for a while, and the Syrian army, never particularly a great force, started going into retreat, and Assad lost a lot of territory. At that time, the Iranians sent cadres of the Hezbollah into Syria to protect the regime. But even that did not help. Therefore, finally, Iranians persuaded Russia to intervene militarily. And Russia intervened in the Syrian conflict in 2015. They were very effective. They carried out armed attacks on the various militant groups and were able to save the regime. So the scenario got reversed. The setbacks that the Assad regime had experienced from 2011 were finally corrected and the regime got consolidated. Over a period of time, it was seen that the enthusiasm of the countries concerned, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar, in terms of regime change, started diminishing. And therefore, the countries started backing off. You find in 2017, Turkey associated itself with Iran as well as Russia as part of a peace process in the country known as the Astana peace process. So
Yes.
you find that there has been a degree of stability that was obtained in Syria and that continued. So by the time you came to say 2020, 2021, the Gulf countries that had been particularly hostile to the Syrian regime started becoming much more accommodative. Some of them opened embassies in Damascus and over a period of time brought President Assad back into the mainstream Arab fold, made him a member once again of the Arab League, etc. So you could say that within a year or so of these initiatives, at that time, the regime controlled about 70% of the country. There was a small group, a militant group located in Idlib. And that militant group, the Syrians wanted to attack them and destroy them. But the Turks intervened. The Turks had sent their army deep inside Syria because they were wanting to monitor and control the activities of the Kurds who were in northeast Syria. And therefore, they had placed their armed forces all across the northern border and they were at that time created their own military force, the Syrian Nationalist Force, made up of Turkoman and Arab, in order to fight with the Kurds. But they also backed these militants who were in Idlib. And that is why you find the Turkish role is now being highlighted in terms of what has happened in Damascus very recently.
Mhm. So now what we are seeing finally is the fact that apparently Bashar al-Assad has taken shelter in Moscow. Uh, it is being told by several experts that why he could not fight back is because Russia did not support Assad, and neither did Iran, because they were fighting their own battles. In between, there is an Israel which I think has now taken complete control of the Golan Heights, and they are probably planning to advance. In the backdrop of all this, we know President Trump is coming back, who will be probably supporting Israel, as we've seen in Trump 1.0. And then, of course, the role that Turkey wants to play in Syria. So all this makes it a very complex kind of, Middle East that we are looking at. And in between all this, there is an India which, has its energy security, for which it depends on that region very much.
You see, what you are looking at is a scenario of extraordinary confusion, chaos, and uncertainty. The facts relating to the regime change that emerged just a few days ago are not yet available in the public domain. So I will share with you my own considered assessment. I believe that over the previous few months, Turkey, Israel, and the United States together concocted detailed arrangements in order to obtain the regime change. Their assessment was, possibly correctly, that because Russia and Iran were already distracted by other commitments in other theaters, they would have less capacity to support the Syrian army and to support the regime of Bashar Assad. I think their assessment was correct. What they did in the meantime, they put together a coalition of elements who were actively hostile to the Bashar regime. And these are three principal elements in this. You find number one, the Kurds. Ironically, the Kurds are patronized by the Americans and protected, and there is an Israeli role as well. This is the Syrian Defense Forces. You also have the Syrian National Forces put together by the Turks. And you have the third element, that is the Islamic group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The lead role in all this appears to have been taken by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but I am convinced that this ragtag group of militants could not have effected such a major assault after taking all the major cities without active role of these the three outside powers, Turkey, Israel, and the United States. My assessment is as follows. After the coalition was put together and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was given a lead role, they were able to ensure that the Syrian army would not fight. How did they ensure this? I think the military commanders were subverted. They were co-opted and subverted, both as a result of the role of Israel, which I think is deeply penetrated in that area, and I think by the Turks themselves. So they were persuaded that there is no role for them in this emerging conflict. They will simply lose their life. And it was obvious that Hezbollah could not fight. You cannot, they are just a small cadre. They cannot substitute for the Syrian army. A Syrian army of 300,000 is not willing to fight. What is a minor cadre that had gone in to back them going to do? And the Russians obviously could not fight either. They were already aware that the support for the regime has melted away as far as its own armed forces are concerned. And obviously, they are distracted elsewhere because of the Ukraine conflict. So I would say to you with complete confidence that without the active role of Turkey, Israel, and the United States in A, putting together the coalition, and B, ensuring that the Syrian armed forces did not fight on behalf of their president, you were able to get these elements finally taking control of Damascus after capturing various other towns and consolidating themselves in Damascus without a fight. So I think this is the background to what has happened up to now. Bashar Assad has fled to Moscow. He has been given sanctuary there. His family has not been killed. But we are looking at very serious uncertainty as far as the outlook relating to Syria is concerned.
Mm-hmm. So, but then we are also seeing the statements coming out of Israel saying that they are worried that, an extremist militant group like this HTS, which is called the Hayat al-Sham, the fact that, some of the weapons have fallen in their hands, which is why Israel is worried, which is why it is making his advance. What do you make of all that? And if you really think that this is a coalition of US, Turkey, and Israel, what is it that they will be gaining out of this? For Turkey, one can really understand, and also for Israel. But what is the larger game plan do you think the United States has in all this?
I wish there was a game plan. The word game plan suggests that there is application of the mind on a serious basis that looks at not just the short term, but the medium term and the long term. I don't believe any of this happened. The three countries came together with a very, very specific and limited agenda to get rid of Bashar Assad, taking advantage of the fact that neither Iran nor Russia would intervene on his behalf. What did they do? They put together a coalition. That coalition has nothing in common. The three entities that I mentioned to you, the Kurds represented by the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Syrian National Forces put together by the Turks, they are actually antagonistic to each other. And then you have the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Now looking back, you find that there have been a preparation. Looking back now, the literature is available. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was originally a jihadi group, has been affiliated at various times both with the Islamic State and Al Qaeda, and it's only very recently that they announced finally that they were not affiliated with any other jihadi group. That is in 2021. I believe that they were in touch with the Kurds. There was a contact between them, there was conversation between them, and some degree of coordination had already taken place, perhaps towards the end of last year. There are reports to this effect. Now, once Damascus has been taken and Bashar Assad has fled, the problems are going to begin because this coalition, this so called coalition, has nothing in common with each other. The Turks have their own agenda. The common point was to get rid of Bashar Assad, and from the Israeli and American point of view, to remove Iran's presence from Syria and to hurt the Russians strategically as well. Though I am told that their bases, their air base and their naval base are still there, they have not yet been removed. But the fact is that it is a setback as far as the Russians are concerned. So the Turks now the core agenda will emerge. And there is no consensus on this. The concern that the Turks have is with regard to the Kurds. And that is why you will find that the Turkish Air Force is already bombing the Kurds. And you find that the Saudis, that the Israelis are agitated about this Islamic group that their actions have empowered. So obviously, they are worried that the various armed capacity that Bashar Assad has left behind, and which which the Iranians had also provided for the use of Hezbollah, it might fall in the hands of these jihadis, and instead of having some degree of peace at the border with Syria, they might have an Islamic group which would be aggressive and vengeful. It has not happened so far, but that is why you find Israel making statements that they are deeply concerned about the empowerment of this jihadi group. So you have that as well. So you have a Turkish agenda, you have an Israeli agenda, and they are all of them completely separate from each other, are now handling the consequences of what they have managed to achieve in Syria just a few days ago.
Mm-hmm. So, and also, I mean, I'll come to the India aspect, but what do you make of this character, Abu Muhammad Al Jolani? The fact that he's, giving interviews to all this, mega US publications, New York Times, CNN, and all. Do you really think he has a plan how to rule Syria? Because it won't be easy for him, and it is also not true that maybe the civil war is over in Syria. I rather think there's going to be more trouble there.
You see, like all jihadi leaders, there is always an enigma surrounding their personality. These are not normal politicians. They are not normal public figures. There is a large part of their agenda, their thinking is unknown. They don't even work with their own name. And very rarely do we know too much about their previous life. Abu Muhammad Jolani is a pseudonym. This gentleman was born in Saudi Arabia and lived in Saudi Arabia for 9 years. In 2003, he became part of Al Qaeda in Iraq, which was set up by Zarqawi against the American occupation. He was imprisoned by the Americans, and he came out after that and joined the Islamic State of Iraq. Do remember that Islamic State of Iraq is a successor of Al Qaeda in Iraq, but in 2007, the then leader of the Islamic State of Iraq disconnected themselves from Al Qaeda. And of course, by 2011, you had if Osama bin Laden was dead, so it made sense for them to reaffirm that the fact that they are no longer connected with Al Qaeda. Abu Muhammad Jolani, then, what happened with the Islamic State of Iraq is that under the leadership of Abu Bakr al Baghdadi, this was put together once again after having received hammer blows from the American attack after 2007. Between 2007 and 10, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi revived and resurrected the Islamic State of Iraq. And this was, by 2010, he had consolidated himself in Iraq once again. In 2011, when the civil conflict in Syria began, he sent his right-hand man, Abu Muhammad Al Jolani, to Syria to participate in the civil conflict. That is, even before he had launched major attacks within Iraq, he had already set up a cadre in Syria under the leadership of Abu Muhammad Jolani. By the end of 2012, this cadre, known as Jabhat Nusra or Victory Front or Liberation Front, had become the best fighting force in Syria against the Bashar Assad government. In April 2013, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced that Jabhat Nusra was an affiliate of the Islamic State of Iraq, and now the Islamic State of Iraq and Jabhat Nusra would come together to form the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. So in April 2013, ISIS emerged. But in Syria, Abu Muhammad Jolani rejected this new affiliation. He said, I am not connected with the Islamic State. I owe allegiance not to the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but to Ayman Zawahiri. Ayman Zawahiri, who had taken over the leadership of Al-Qaeda, he separated himself from the Islamic State, the ISIS that had emerged, and said, I am affiliated with Al-Qaeda. And therefore, but there was fighting between the ISIS cadres and Jabhat Nusra. And at that time, Jabhat Nusra did not do well. ISIS became a power. And you are aware that between 2014 and 2016, they reached the peak of their Islamic State. At that stage, Jabhat Nusra was in the background. But once the Islamic State was hammered out of existence, both in Iraq and Syria, and by 2019, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was dead, Abu Muhammad Jolani re-emerged on the battlefront and now reorganized himself. He is, what we know in terms of facts are very clear. This is a period of extraordinary confusion in Syria. The various militants ranged against the Damascus regime are already fighting a lot with each other. They are of different ideological affiliation. Some are hardcore jihadi, even more aggressive than Al-Qaeda. Some are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Some of them say, we are jihadi, but we are not interested in transnational jihad. Our jihad is in Syria. At that stage, you had Jabhat Nusra reinvented itself. It gave itself different names. Initially, it was called Jabal Fatah al-Sham, but then went low-key, allowed other groups to come forward. But in 2017, they formed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, bringing together a very large number of militant groups of different affiliations. They had a nominal leader who was not Jolani at that time, but within a few months, the nominal leader stepped aside, and Abu Muhammad Jolani, till then the military leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, now became he became the political and the military. He also started reinventing himself, particularly from 2019. He became a public figure. He allowed photographs to be taken. He started meeting communities. He started talking the language of services. He played down the Islamic character and played up the importance of resistance to a dictatorial regime. So the political agenda of resistance became more important than the ideological agenda. He gave interviews He wanted to build up a new persona as far as Western media is concerned and became less critical of the American. He gave interviews to PBS and CNN and did and emphasized the fact
Right.
that our fight is against Bashar Assad and his tyranny. We are not Islamist in the Taliban sense. We are liberal. We are moderate. We are supportive of women's aspirations. We will support minorities. A completely different agenda from what the Americans had heard till then from other jihadis. I
Right.
suspect that is the time where you find the Americans and the Israelis buying this agenda of HTS, seeing in this the
Correct.
opportunity to pursue their political agenda of diluting Russian influence and ousting the Iranians. And I think this is what happened. So that is why I have argued very
Hmm.
strongly that Turkey, Israel, and the United States have worked carefully together to bring about regime change, but I'm not sure where we are going in future.
So, and also, I know, I mean, there is paucity of time, but just to understand from you, since, as you rightly said, that this is an unprecedented period of confusion in Syria, and of course, it entangles the larger region of Middle East and West Asia. But what impact will it have for India, do you think, going forward, at least in the near 4 5 years, when we know there will be a President Trump in the United States, and there is a much more aggressive Israel?
Before I come to India, let me talk about Syria itself. Why do I say that this is going to be a period of extraordinary confusion? Well, I think that the principal role players whom I have named, Turkey, Israel, and the United States, came into play with a very limited and specific agenda, a kind of tactical gains or tactical advantage without thinking through the strategic aspects.
Mhm.
Those are now being discussed in the public domain. And obviously, since we don't know enough, we can only see the fact that you have a Kurdish group in the northeast, you have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham dominating large parts of Syria, and you have the Turkish armed forces and their affiliate, the Turkoman affiliate of the Syrian National Army, all of them poised to look out for their own very disparate interests. Which is why, and they are very well armed, they are aggressive, and they are now flush with victory. There is already talk of taking revenge. This is very dangerous because the minute you start taking revenge, you will start rounding up people and killing them fairly quickly. So you will have a source of disorder right there. And then where do you stop? Because your agenda at this stage, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham may be speaking the language of moderation and accommodation, but you have never seen them in action. Their rule in Idlib is not particularly encouraging. It was an Islamic rule. We don't know. You see, Islam is a catch-all word. What Islam are you talking about? What are you talking about in terms of an Islamic state? What will be the role of Islam in this entity which you now control? And what is your role with regard to the Kurds? Do recall one very interesting development. Hamas has has welcomed the success of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They
Right.
have said that you are well rid of the tyrant and dictator of Bashar Assad, and we welcome your
Even
rule.
the
That
Taliban
means
has
the
done so.
Islamic element
Hmm.
and the element of resistance possibly is likely to be more important than the moderation and accommodation that you heard about. Therefore, I am looking at a very serious disorder. Now, leaving that aside, what next in the region? You feel a deep sense of triumphalism in Israel. Netanyahu, with a grinning visage, has taken full credit for whatever has happened in Syria. And he said it was months in the making, and I have achieved, and I have changed the face of the Middle East. He is being, you see, Netanyahu's principal concerns today are domestic. He has successfully hammered Hezbollah. He has taken harsh revenge on the Palestinians and killed a large number of Hamas leaders. He has also emasculated Iran in terms of their military encounter. He is today triumphant. His his popularity rating in Israel has gone up. He is the king of everything that he sees. He is basically communicating to the Israeli people, I am your guardian. So we are now looking at a scenario where the outlook is very uncertain. The biggest challenge that we have in the region is, what does Prime Minister Netanyahu now wish to do? He is committed to an endless war as far as Palestine is concerned. We are likely to see a kind of temporary truce in Lebanon because Hezbollah, while has taken some important hammer blows, has not been vanquished. They are still showering missiles and drones onto Israeli territory. And then you have Iran. The, a part of the uh, Israeli game plan, and possibly something that Netanyahu would like to see, would be to co opt the United States, either Biden, even now, or possibly Trump later, into a massive joint attack upon Iran. That we don't know. There's a lot of discussion going on in the media in this regard. Various people are weighing in one way or the other. No one seems to know. I think this is where India has its challenge. While India is not immediately affected by what is happening in Syria, our principal relationship in any case is with the GCC countries and with Israel, and these are not affected just yet. A major conflict in West Asia, particularly involving the Gulf region, an assault upon Iran, to be specific, would, I think, very seriously harm India's interests, both in the short term and in the long term. India has crucial relations with the Gulf countries in terms of its energy security needs, its trade, its investment, and above all, the safety of its community. All these interests would be seriously jeopardized if there were to be a conflict which would involve Iran and the Israelis. I would therefore suggest, with all emphasis at my command, that India should use its diplomatic influence in Tel Aviv to ensure that Netanyahu now basks in the victories that he has already had, but does not launch a major assault upon Iran. There would need to be, on the contrary, certain initiatives taken by countries, and I would put India as a role player in that. Countries like India and possibly other countries which are influential in the region, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, should be able to now become diplomatic players in the region. War has had its time. There have been certain changes in the region as a result of war. But war cannot solve political issues. Political issues need diplomacy, they need leadership, they need accommodation, they need concessions. I believe this is a moment that India's diplomacy should really come into its own and work hard with the Israelis and other players in the region, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc., with most of whom we have excellent relations. We should work with them to see how we can promote. Initially, I always say conflict management. Conflict management is crucial before you can start resolving issues. And then we can look towards conflict resolution over a longer period of time.
But sir, just my last question. Do you think that, with these countries coming into fray and they're having their own, each of them having their own agenda, as you said, do you think India has that much of power to be taken seriously by all these players, no matter what we say? I mean, in terms of Russia, Ukraine, we've been talking about this is not an era of war. A solution cannot be found on the battleground. But we are also very clear that we don't have a peace plan. We don't want to mediate. So, what is it that you really think we can do?
You use the term power. I don't believe India, of course, has the power, but what you should be really looking at is influence. India does have extraordinary influence, and it also has political and diplomatic capacity. I believe what is missing in the scenario is not influence or capability, it is interest. And I have been unhappy about this aspect in the past, that with all the clout that we have at home, we actually don't bother about utilizing it in regions where our interests are crucially impacted. I think that this is more important. I think that our Prime Minister should encourage the Foreign Minister and Foreign Secretary to shape consultations with likely allies in this initiative, as well as with the major countries of the region, to see how we can provide a degree of stability in the region and over a period of time address some of the crucial issues which agitate the region. Do recall here, many of the problems are connected with absence of trust. And unless you have important interlocutors who are able to bridge these gaps of conversation, of mutual understanding and mutual accommodation, the countries themselves are incapable of doing it on their own. They are at war. They have serious differences with each other. They have not been in communication over several decades. I think this is the time where we should now intervene. And I would say one last point to you on this. We should do this before we have the impact of the uncertainty of the Trump administration. You see, the Trump, I am not going to already conclude what it is going to be like. We don't know. But the fact remains that President Donald Trump is an unpredictable persona and has very often, particularly in his first term, given the impression of impulsiveness, of a of some kind of affiliation with anarchy and chaos. I believe that with the kind of good sense and the kind of influence and the kind of concerns that we have in terms of our crucial interests, we should be able to bring a degree of stability in the region, which I believe at this time, I'm certainly concerned about it, I believe might not be safe as far as the Trump administration is concerned.
Very crucial point, sir. However, on that note, we need to end this conversation. That was Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. He was India's ambassador to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman. And of course, he has the book West Asia at War, if you really want to understand what the region is and how the dynamics are being played out. Thank you for watching this conversation. For ABP Live, this is Nayanima Basu.
Thank you very much, Nayan. I wish you all the best.